Representative Omar, before this committee proceeds to vote upon your recommendations regarding increased assistance to Somalia, I hold the firm belief that the members ought to be apprised of the $340,000 you have personally wired to Mogadishu over the course of the past 4 years, and specifically, they must know the identity of the individual who received those funds. The voice of Vice President JD Vance sliced through the atmosphere of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room with the sharpness of a blade. Every head turned in unison, and the cameras representing C-SPAN and the various news networks swiveled instantly from Ilhan Omar, who was seated at the witness table toward the doorway where Vance had just made his entrance. This occurrence was far from normal. Vice presidents generally did not attend committee hearings, and certainly not hearings to which they had not been formally invited. Yet, there he stood, striding down the center aisle with FBI Director Christopher Wray and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent flanking him, resembling determined prosecutors approaching a defendant. Omar froze in the middle of her sentence. She had been 30 minutes into her testimony regarding the humanitarian crisis in Somalia, speaking on the necessity for greater American aid and the moral obligation to assist refugees. The Democratic members of the committee had been nodding with sympathy, while the Republicans had appeared bored, though not outwardly hostile. The proceedings were unfolding exactly as planned until the Vice President of the United States walked in, carrying a folder stamped with classified markings. Committee Chairman Jim Risch looked as bewildered as everyone else in the room. "Mr. Vice President, this is highly irregular, as we are currently in the midst of testimony from a witness." "I am fully aware, Senator," Vance replied, as he walked straight to the witness table where Omar sat and placed the folder down firmly in front of her. "However, Representative Omar is testifying regarding United States policy toward Somalia, about the quantity of aid we should dispatch, and regarding which organizations should be the recipients of American taxpayer money. I believe that before the committee renders any decisions based upon her expert testimony, they should be informed about her personal financial connections to designated terrorist organizations within Somalia." The room erupted into chaos, with reporters leaning forward and committee members speaking over one another. Omar's face had transformed from an expression of confidence to a deathly pale shade within mere seconds. Vance opened the folder and extracted what appeared to be bank records and wire transfer documents, all displaying Omar's name with absolute clarity. 47 separate wire transfers, Vance stated, his voice carrying clearly over the chaos, executed between January 2020 and October 2024, totaling $340,000. All of these funds were sent through money transfer services to a single recipient in Mogadishu. Ahmed Noor said, "Your brother-in-law." He placed the documents on the table where the cameras could capture them, revealing Omar's signature, her bank account numbers, the specific amounts, and the dates. Ahmed Noor Saeed operates a business known as the Bakara Trading Company. The Treasury Department designated it as a terrorism financing entity in 2023. Ahmed himself is listed on the FBI terrorism watch list. And regarding the money you sent him, that $340,000, we have traced it through Hawala networks directly to al-Shabaab operatives, to the very terrorists from whom you claim to have fled as a child. Omar attempted to speak, but no sound emerged from her throat. She gazed at the documents as if they were poisonous. Those were her bank records, her transactions, and her money going to her brother-in-law, whom she had never mentioned in any financial disclosure. Chairman Risch found his voice and asked, "Mr. Vice President, these are serious allegations. Do you possess evidence?" "I have 18 months of FBI investigation," Vance replied. Wray stepped forward, opening his own folder to reveal wire transfer records, NSA intercepts of Ahmed Noor Saeed, coordinating with al-Shabaab commanders, and Treasury Department money tracing, demonstrating that Representative Omar's funds were being utilized to finance terrorist operations. "This is not an allegation," Ray stated. "This is a documented fact." The ranking Democrat, Senator Ben Cardin, looked stricken as he asked, "Representative Omar, do you wish to respond to these accusations?" Omar's mouth opened and closed, her hands gripping the witness table tightly. She had come here to advocate for Somalia, to position herself as the voice of refugees and immigrants, and to attack American foreign policy from the moral high ground. Now she was sitting at a witness table with evidence of terrorism financing spread out in front of her, with C-SPAN broadcasting live, and she had no idea what to say. "Those wire transfers were to family," she stammered. "I was helping family members with their finances. You were financing al-Shabaab operations," Vance interrupted. "Director Ray, please show the committee where the money went." Ray pulled up a chart displaying the flow of money, from Omar's bank account to the money transfer service, from the transfer service to Ahmed Noor Saeed, and from Ahmed to a network of individuals. Those individuals were flagged as al-Shabaab financiers and operatives. "We have traced $34,000 directly to individuals involved in terrorist attacks," Ray said, in a matter-of-fact tone. "Specifically, the Mogadishu hotel bombing in 2022 and the attack on African Union peacekeepers in 2023. Both operations utilized money that originated from Representative Omar's wire transfers." Omar stood up abruptly and shouted, "This is Islamophobia. This is targeting me, because I am Muslim, and I speak out against injustice." "This is evidence," Vance said calmly. "Bank records do not possess religious bias, and wire transfers are not Islamophobic. You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier, which is a federal crime, and you did it while serving in Congress, while having access to classified briefings about al-Shabaab, and while voting on foreign policy that affected Somalia." He pulled out voting records and continued, "You voted against designating al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization in 2021. You opposed sanctions on Somali entities in 2022. You pushed for increased aid to Somalia that would flow through organizations your family controls. Every vote you cast on Somalia benefited your family's interests. You were not representing Minnesota, you were representing Mogadishu." The Democratic committee members looked as though they wished to be anywhere else, while the Republicans looked energized, as if Christmas had arrived early. The cameras captured every second of Omar's face, cycling through emotions: defiance, panic, anger, and fear. "I want my attorney," Omar said, her voice shaking. "You will need one," Vance agreed, "because the FBI has more than just terrorism financing to discuss with you." Director Ray, "Tell the committee about the marriage fraud." And just like that, Ilhan Omar realized this was not merely about money. This was about everything. Every lie, every fraud, every betrayal, all of it was about to be exposed on live television. 4 hours earlier, Ilhan Omar had been in her congressional office in the Longworth House office building, reviewing her testimony with her staff. She felt good and confident. This was her moment. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee had invited her to testify as an expert witness on U.S. policy towards Somalia and East Africa. Her expertise being her background as a Somali American, a former refugee, and the most prominent voice in Congress on East African issues. "This is perfect," her chief of staff said while reviewing the testimony. "You position yourself as the moral voice on refugee issues. You attack the administration's Africa policy as insufficient, and you call for more aid, more engagement, and more support for Somalia." Omar nodded, reading through her prepared remarks. They were good, emotional, and personal. She would talk about fleeing Somalia as a child, about the refugee camp in Kenya, about arriving in America with nothing, and about the American dream that allowed a refugee to become a congresswoman. Then she would pivot to policy, arguing how America was not doing enough, how the humanitarian crisis in Somalia required more U.S. aid, and how cutting aid was cruel and short-sighted. It would play perfectly with her base, get her on every progressive news show, and reinforce her brand as the bold voice standing up for refugees and immigrants. "The Republicans will probably attack you," her communications director noted. "They always do, but you are good at that. Turn it into them being anti-immigrant." "Let them attack," Omar said with confidence. "I am testifying about saving lives, and if they want to attack that, they can explain to voters why they hate refugees." What Omar did not know, and could not have imagined, was that at that exact moment, in a secure facility in Virginia, Vice President JD Vance was reviewing the final version of an 18-month FBI investigation that would destroy her. The investigation had started in June 2023, when the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network flagged unusual wire transfer patterns from Omar's personal bank account. 47 transfers to Somalia over 4 years, all structured just under the $10,000 reporting threshold, representing a classic money laundering pattern. Treasury had referred it to the FBI, and the FBI had opened a counter-terrorism investigation. What they found was worse than anyone expected. Vance sat in the SCIF, the sensitive compartmented information facility, with his investigation team, FBI Director Wray, Treasury Secretary Besant, the NSA Director, and the White House counsel, all with top-secret clearances and all with evidence that would end a congressional career. "Walk me through it one more time," Vance said. "I want to make sure we have her dead to rights before I walk into that hearing." Wray opened the primary evidence binder and began. Representative Ilhan Omar, 42 years old, Congresswoman from Minnesota's 5th District since 2019. Born in Mogadishu, Somalia, in 1982, came to the United States as a refugee. In 1992, became a citizen in 2000, elected to the Minnesota State Legislature in 2016, and to Congress in 2018. Her public story is the American dream refugee becomes Congresswoman, but we have found systematic criminal activity spanning her entire time in office. He pulled out the financial records, starting with the money. Between January 2020 and October 2024, Omar made 47 wire transfers from her personal Bank of America account to money transfer services, totaling $340,000. All transfers were structured under $10,000 to avoid currency transaction reports. All the money went to one recipient, Ahmed Nur Saeed, who is her brother-in-law, her first husband's brother. Ahmed is based in Mogadishu, where he operates the Bakara Trading Company, ostensibly an import-export business. Vance looked at surveillance photos of Ahmed Nur Said in Mogadishu meeting with known al-Shabaab operatives. "How do we know he is a terrorist financier?" Vance asked. "Multiple sources," Wray said. Treasury designated Bakara Trading as a terrorism financing entity in 2023, based on evidence it was being used to move money to al-Shabaab. Ahmed himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list. The NSA has intercepts of him coordinating with known al-Shabaab commanders. He showed the intercepts, translated conversations between Ahmed and individuals identified as al-Shabaab, financial facilitators discussing fund transfers and operational needs. "We traced Omar's money through the Hawala network," Treasury Secretary Besant added. Hawala is an informal money transfer system common in Somalia, very difficult to trace. But we had help from Somali government sources who want al-Shabaab stopped. She showed the money flow. Omar sends money to the transfer service, The transfer service delivers to Ahmed, and Ahmed distributes it through the Hawala network to multiple individuals. We have identified 18 recipients who are confirmed al-Shabaab members or facilitators. We can directly connect $34,000 from Omar's transfers to two specific terrorist attacks: the Mogadishu hotel bombing in March 2022 that killed 17 people, and the attack on African Union peacekeepers in August 2023 that killed 9. Vance absorbed this information. She funded terrorist attacks while serving in Congress. Correct, Ray confirmed. But it gets worse. Her congressional voting record shows she consistently voted in ways that benefited al-Shabaab and her family's interests in Somalia. He pulled up voting records. July 2021 vote to designate al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization. She voted no, one of only 3 House members to do so. October 2022 vote to impose sanctions on entities financing terrorism in Somalia. She voted no. March 2023 vote on a foreign aid package. She pushed amendments to increase aid to Somalia, specifically to organizations that her family has connections to. She was not just funding terrorism with personal money. She was using her congressional position to advance policies that benefited terrorists and her family. The NSA director added the intelligence dimension. We have been monitoring her communications under a FISA warrant since April 2023. The warrant was approved based on probable cause that she was acting as an agent of a foreign terrorist organization. Her phone calls to Ahmed show her discussing U.S. policy towards Somalia, discussing what legislation is coming, and discussing how to influence aid distribution. She is coordinating with him, using her position to help him. Vance looked at the evidence. It was overwhelming, but he knew the moment he exposed this publicly, Omar would claim Islamophobia, would say she was being targeted for being Muslim, for being critical of Israel, and for being a woman of color. What about the marriage fraud? He asked. That has been alleged for years, but never proven. The White House counsel pulled out the DNA evidence and said, "We finally got it." When Omar was arrested for a traffic violation in August, Minnesota took a DNA sample per standard procedure. We got a warrant to compare it to Ahmed Nur Said Elmi's DNA from when he applied for immigration status. The results show a 99.9% probability they are siblings, brother, and sister, which means when Omar married Ahmed Elmi in 2009, she married her brother. That is immigration fraud. She did it to get him U.S. residency status. Vance read the DNA report. It was definitive. This destroys the no-evidence defense she has used for years. And there is tax evasion, Treasury added. She received income from Somali sources that she never reported. Money flowing back from her family, approximately $250,000 over 5 years, that appears nowhere on her tax returns. She also used campaign funds for personal expenses. Her husband's consulting firm received $2.8 million from her campaign. We have investigated what services he provided and can't find any actual work product. Vance sat back and took it all in. Terrorism financing, immigration fraud, tax evasion, campaign finance violations, and using a congressional position to benefit foreign interests. It was the most complete corruption case he had seen against a sitting member of Congress. She is testifying at the Foreign Relations Committee today, Vance said, about Somalia aid, recommending the U.S. send more money to organizations connected to her family while she is actively funding terrorists there. He made his decision. I am going to that hearing. I am walking in with this evidence on live television, and I am ending her career today. His team looked at each other. That is unprecedented, the White House counsel said. Vice presidents don't ambush witnesses at committee hearings. "I am not ambushing a witness," Vance said. "I am exposing a terrorist financier who happens to hold a congressional seat, and there is a difference." At 2 p.m., the Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing began. Chairman Risch gavelled it in. "Today we are examining U.S. policy towards Somalia and East Africa, and we are honored to have Representative Ilhan Omar as our witness, given her expertise and background." Omar took her seat at the witness table, adjusted her microphone, and looked at the cameras with practiced confidence. This was her element, speaking truth to power and advocating for the powerless. Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Cardin, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me. I want to talk today about the humanitarian crisis in Somalia and what America can do to help. She launched into her testimony, emotional and personal, describing her experience as a child refugee, the trauma of fleeing violence, the hope of coming to America, and the opportunity this country gave her. "But America is not doing enough for the people who are suffering now," she continued. "The drought in Somalia has displaced millions. The conflict with al-Shabaab continues to destabilize the region, and American aid has been cut when it should be increased." She called for more funding, more aid organizations, and more engagement with Somali civil society. She made it sound noble, humanitarian, and moral. The Democratic senators nodded along. Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut asked sympathetic questions about the humanitarian situation, and Senator Chris Coons from Delaware asked about refugee resettlement. Omar was hitting her stride. This was going perfectly. In 30 minutes, she would be done. Would do a press conference attacking Republicans for not caring about refugees, and would be on MSNBC by tonight talking about her powerful testimony. Then the doors at the back of the hearing room opened, and Vice President JD Vance walked in. Not announced, not invited. He just walked in with the FBI Director and Treasury Secretary, heading straight down the aisle toward the witness table. The room went silent. Senators stopped mid-question, staffers froze, and cameras swiveled to capture this completely unprecedented moment. Omar watched him approach, confusion on her face. Why was the vice president here? This was not his committee, and he had no role in this hearing. Then she saw the classified folder in his hand, saw the expression on his face, and felt the first flutter of real fear. Vance reached the witness table and set his folder down in front of Omar with a solid thump that echoed in the now silent room. Chairman Risch tried to regain control. "Mr. Vice President, this is highly unusual. We are in the middle of a committee hearing. I am aware." "Senator Risch," Vance's voice was respectful but firm. "But Representative Omar is testifying about Somalia, about how much American aid should go there, and about which organizations should receive taxpayer money. Before this committee votes on anything based on her recommendations, I believe the members should know about her personal financial connections to the very terrorist organizations we are supposed to be fighting." The room erupted, reporters scrambling for phones and committee members talking over each other. Omar's face cycled from confusion to anger to something close to panic. Senator Cardin, the ranking Democrat, found his voice. "Mr. Vice President, that is an extraordinary accusation. Do you have evidence to support it?" Vance opened the folder, pulled out bank records, and set them on the table facing the cameras so everyone could see. 47 wire transfers, January 2020 through October 2024. Total amount $340,000. All from Representative Omar's personal bank account, all sent to Mogadishu, Somalia, and all to one recipient. He placed each document deliberately. Wire transfer confirmations, bank statements, all with Omar's name clearly visible. Her signature, her account numbers, and the amounts ranging from $3,000 to $9,000, always under the $10,000 reporting threshold. The recipient was Ahmed Noor Saeed, Representative Omar's brother-in-law. Ahmed operates a business in Mogadishu called Bakara Trading Company. Vance pulled out Treasury Department documents. In September 2023, the United States Treasury Department designated Bakara Trading as a terrorism financing entity. Ahmed Noor Saeed himself is on the FBI terrorism watch list. And regarding the money Representative Omar sent to him, we have traced it through Hawala networks to al-Shabaab operatives. Omar tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't work. Those were family transfers I was helping family with. With financing terrorism, Vance said flatly. Director Wray, show the committee the money trail. FBI Director Wray stepped forward with his own evidence, presenting flowcharts showing the money movement from Omar's bank to Western Union, to Ahmed Noor Saeed, to a network of individuals in Mogadishu and surrounding areas. We have identified 18 recipients of funds that originated from Representative Omar's transfers, Wray said, his voice clinical and professional. All 18 are on terrorism watch lists. 7 are confirmed al-Shabaab members. 4 are financial facilitators for the organization, and the remaining 7 provide logistical support. He pulled up photographs of men in Mogadishu, some in military-style clothing, and some in traditional dress, all labeled with names and terrorism-related designations. We can directly trace $34,000 from Representative Omar's transfers to 2 specific terrorist attacks. The Mogadishu hotel bombing on March 15, 2022, that killed 17 people, including 2 American aid workers, and the attack on African Union peacekeepers on August 23, 2023, that killed 9 soldiers. The committee room was deathly silent. Every senator stared at the evidence, and every camera captured Omar's face as the color drained from it. Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican from South Carolina, spoke up, his voice hard. Representative Omar, did you, or did you not, send $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier? Omar's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. I sent money to family. I had no knowledge of what they were doing with. You are on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Vance interrupted. You receive classified briefings about al-Shabaab and about terrorism financing networks in Somalia. You knew, or should have known, exactly what your brother-in-law was doing, and you sent him money anyway. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, piled on. Mr. Vice President, you mentioned her voting record. Can you elaborate? Vance pulled out congressional voting records. Representative Omar has voted on Somalia-related issues multiple times, and her voting pattern is interesting. He read from the documents. July 2021 House vote on a resolution to designate al-Shabaab as a foreign terrorist organization. The vote was 417 to 3. 3 members voted no. Representative Omar was one of them. She voted against designating the organization she was secretly funding as a terrorist group. Gasps emanated from the audience, and some senators literally leaned back in shock. October 2022 vote on imposing sanctions on entities that finance terrorism in East Africa. Representative Omar voted no, one of 7 members to do so. March 2023 Foreign Aid Appropriations. Representative Omar introduced amendments to increase aid to Somalia by $200 million. The aid was supposed to go to humanitarian organizations, but she specifically pushed for organizations with ties to her family's business interests. Senator Ted Cruz, Republican from Texas, was practically vibrating with anger. So she was funding terrorists with personal money and trying to get taxpayer money sent to organizations her family controls? That appears to be the case, Vance confirmed. Omar finally found her voice. It came out too loud and too defensive. This is Islamophobia. This is the same targeting that Muslims in this country have faced for decades. You are attacking me because I speak out against American imperialism, because I criticize Israel, and because I am a Muslim woman who won't. This is evidence. Vance's voice cut through her rising volume. Bank records are not Islamophobic, and wire transfers do not have religious bias. You sent $340,000 to a designated terrorism financier. That is material support for terrorism under federal law. Title 18, Section 2339B of the U.S. Code. It carries a penalty of up to 20 years in prison. He pulled out the statute and showed it to the committee. The law is clear. Providing material support, including money, to foreign terrorist organizations is a federal crime. It does not matter if you claim it was for family. It does not matter if you claim you didn't know the money went to terrorists. You are guilty. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, looked pained but asked the obvious question. Representative Omar, can you explain these wire transfers? Omar looked at Murphy like he had betrayed her. He was a Democrat. He was supposed to be on her side. But he was looking at the evidence spread on the table and could not ignore it. I sent money to family members who were struggling, Omar said, her voice shaking. You know Somalia is a poor country. My family needed help, and I had no idea what Ahmed was doing with. You had extensive idea, Ray interrupted. We have NSA intercepts of your phone calls with Ahmed. Conversations where you discussed U.S. policy towards Somalia, where you told him about upcoming legislation, and where you coordinated with him about which organizations should receive aid. He pulled out transcripts redacted to protect sources and methods, but with enough detail visible to be damning. Phone call from May 2022. You told Ahmed that the House Foreign Affairs Committee was considering sanctions on Somali businesses. You discussed how to structure his company to avoid those sanctions. That is coordination with a foreign entity to evade U.S. law. Phone call from November 2023. You discussed with Ahmed how much aid money would be coming to Somalia and which organizations would receive it. You were sharing classified information from committee briefings with a terrorism financier. Omar was shaking her head. Those calls were about family business, about using your congressional position to help terrorists, Vance said. But we are not done. Secretary Bessent, tell the committee about the tax evasion. Treasury Secretary Bessent stepped forward with more documents. In addition to the money Representative Omar sent to Somalia, we have identified money flowing back to her from Somali sources. Approximately $250,000 over 5 years. This money appears nowhere on her tax returns. She showed the financial tracking. Money came through various channels, some through her husband's consulting company, some through shell companies, some in cash, but we have traced it all, and she reported none of it to the IRS. That is tax evasion, Title 26, Section 7201. Penalty of up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa and a longtime crusader against government waste, jumped in. What about her campaign finances? There have been allegations for years about her paying her husband's company. Bessent nodded. Her campaign paid her husband's consulting firm, E Street Group, $2.8 million between 2019 and 2024. We investigated what services this company provided, interviewed campaign staff, and asked for deliverables, work product, or anything showing what they did for almost $3 million. Nobody could describe actual work. The company has no website, no other clients, and no apparent expertise. It appears to be a shell company created solely to funnel campaign money to her household. That is conversion of campaign funds for personal use, a federal election law violation, and fraud. Vance pulled out what was clearly the most explosive evidence, a DNA report with official federal seals on it. And then, there is the immigration fraud. The allegations have existed for years. Representative Omar has dismissed them as conspiracy theories, racist smears, and baseless accusations. Let me show the committee why those accusations were accurate. He held up the DNA report. In August 2024, Representative Omar was stopped for a traffic violation in Minnesota. Standard procedure in Minnesota is to collect DNA samples during any arrest or citation. That sample was entered into the federal database. We obtained a warrant to compare her DNA to that of Ahmed Noor Said Elmi. Ahmed Elmi was the man Representative Omar married in 2009. She claimed he was unrelated to her, just a man she married, then divorced in 2017, before remarrying her first husband, Ahmed Hirsi. Vance showed the DNA results. The comparison shows a 99.9% probability that Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noor Said Elmi are biological siblings. They share the same parents. They are brother and sister. The committee room exploded, with senators shouting, reporters on phones, and cameras zooming in on Omar's face as she sat frozen, unable to deny scientific evidence. She married her brother, Vance said over the chaos. She did it to help him obtain U.S. residency status, that is immigration fraud, under Title 8, Section 1325 of the U.S. Code, and it is also marriage fraud under Title 8, Section 1182. Both are felonies. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, was on his feet. This is a sitting member of Congress who committed immigration fraud to get her brother into the country. Correct, Vance confirmed. And it gets worse. Ahmed Elmi, her brother, has connections to extremist groups in Somalia. By helping him obtain U.S. residency, she potentially facilitated the entry of an individual with terrorist ties. Omar finally exploded. This is a lie. This is fabricated evidence you are manufacturing. It is a DNA test, Vance said calmly, from a federal laboratory with the chain of custody documented and scientifically verified. You can challenge it in court, but the science does not lie. You married your brother. Senator Cardin tried to regain some order. Mr. Vice President, these are extraordinary allegations. Does Representative Omar have an opportunity to respond with counsel present? She can have all the counsel she wants, Vance said. But the evidence does not change. The wire transfers are documented. The money trail to terrorists is documented. The DNA test is scientific fact. The tax evasion is proven by her own returns, and the campaign finance violations are on record with the FEC. He turned to face Omar directly. You came to America as a refugee. This country gave you safety, education, and opportunity. You became a citizen, you got elected to Congress, you had every advantage, and you used your position to fund the terrorists you claim to have fled from. You betrayed everyone who believed in you. Omar's eyes were wet now. Whether from anger, fear, or shame, it was impossible to tell. I dedicated my life to helping refugees, to fighting for immigrant rights. You dedicated your life to enriching yourself and your family while using progressive politics as cover, Vance interrupted. You are not a champion of refugees. You are a fraud who exploited your refugee story for personal gain and political power. And while you were lecturing Americans about their moral failures, you were wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to terrorists. Chairman Risch tried to restore order. I think, given the severity of these allegations, this committee needs to adjourn. And no, Senator Cotton cut him off. We are not adjourning. We have a witness under oath who has been accused of terrorism, financing, and immigration fraud. I want answers. Representative Omar, did you send $340,000 to Ahmed Nur Saeed? Silence. Omar stared at the table. Did you marry your brother to help him get immigration status? More silence. Did you fail to report $250,000 in income on your tax returns? Still, nothing. Senator Rubio stood. Mr. Chairman, the witness is refusing to answer direct questions about material support for terrorism. I move that this committee immediately refer this matter to the Department of Justice and vote to recommend the House expel Representative Omar. Second, Senator Cotton said immediately. The Democrats on the committee looked at each other. They knew what was coming. The evidence was overwhelming. If they defended Omar now, they would be defending a terrorism financier. But if they voted against her, they would face backlash from the progressive wing. Senator Murphy made the calculation. I think we need to see all the evidence before voting on anything. But this should absolutely be referred to DOJ. Agreed, Senator Coons said quietly. Other Democrats nodded. Omar looked around wildly, seeing every Democrat abandoning her and every Republican already calling for her head. The evidence spread across the table where millions were watching on C-SPAN. I want my attorney, she said, her voice barely audible. You will have plenty of time to talk to attorneys, Vance said. Director Ray, I believe you have something to tell Representative Omar? Ray pulled out a document and read from it formally. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, based on evidence gathered during an 18-month investigation into material support for terrorism, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and related offenses, a federal grand jury has returned an indictment. There are FBI agents waiting outside this hearing room. When you leave, you will be taken into federal custody. Omar's face went white. You can't arrest a sitting member of Congress. We can arrest anyone who commits federal crimes, Ray said. The Constitution protects you from arrest, while Congress is in session for minor offenses, not for felonies, and not for terrorism. You are going to be arrested, Representative Omar. Today, the hearing room erupted again. This was not just political theater. This was an actual arrest of a sitting congresswoman happening in real time on live television. Chairman Risch gavelled repeatedly, trying to restore order. This hearing is adjourned. Representative Omar, you are dismissed from. Omar was already standing, trying to leave. But her legs were shaking so badly, she could barely walk. Her staff tried to help her, but she pushed them away and walked toward the exit on unsteady legs, every camera following her. She reached the door, pushed it open, and found 6 FBI agents waiting in the hallway. The agents moved efficiently and professionally. They had done this 1,000 times, but never to a sitting member of Congress, and never on live television with cameras capturing every second. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, you are under arrest for material support for terrorism, immigration fraud, tax evasion, and related charges. The lead agent read from the indictment as another agent moved behind Omar with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Get your hands off me. Omar tried to pull away. This is illegal. You can't arrest me. I am a member of Congress. You are a suspect in a terrorism financing case, the agent said calmly. Put your hands behind your back. The handcuffs went on with a click-click sound echoing in the marble hallway. Cameras capturing every moment. Omar in handcuffs, being arrested by federal agents, while other members of Congress watched from the doorway in shocked silence. This is political persecution, Omar shouted as the agents began walking her toward the elevator. This is the Trump administration targeting its critics. This is 18 months of evidence showing you funded al-Shabaab, one of the agents said quietly, not unkindly, just stating fact. Save it for your lawyer, ma'am. The elevator doors closed on Ilhan Omar in handcuffs. FBI agents on either side. Her career as a congresswoman was over after just 6 years. The doors closed, and she was gone. Back in the hearing room, the committee sat in stunned silence. Then Senator Rubio spoke. Mr. Chairman, I move that this committee vote immediately on a resolution referring Representative Omar to the House Ethics Committee with a recommendation for immediate expulsion. Second, said Senator Cotton. The vote was unanimous, 15-0, with every Democrat and every Republican voting to recommend Omar's expulsion. Within an hour, the footage was everywhere. Not edited clips, but the full video of the entire confrontation. Vance presenting evidence, Omar unable to answer questions, the DNA test, proving she married her brother, the money trail to terrorists, and the arrest. Congresswoman arrested for terrorism. Financing was the headline on every news site. Not Fox News spinning it, just the facts. A sitting member of Congress arrested by the FBI for funding al-Shabaab. By evening, the House had scheduled an emergency expulsion vote for the next day. Speaker Mike Johnson issued a statement. The evidence presented today is overwhelming. If Representative Omar funded terrorism while serving in Congress, she cannot remain in this body. Even progressive Democrats were running away. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez issued a statement. If these allegations are true, they represent a complete betrayal of progressive values. We must let the legal process proceed. Bernie Sanders. Terrorism has no place in our political movement. These are serious charges that must be addressed through the justice system. The Squad, Omar's closest allies in Congress, were all distancing themselves. Nobody wanted to be associated with a terrorism financier. That night, Omar sat in federal detention at the Alexandria Detention Center. Not in general population, but in protective custody for her own safety. And because of the sensitive nature of the charges, her lawyer, a high-profile criminal defense attorney she had hired with emergency funds, sat across from her in the visitation room, going through the evidence. This is bad, Ilhan. This is really bad. Omar was still in shock. They can't prove I knew the money was going to terrorists. I was sending it to family. Your brother-in-law is on the terrorism watch list, the lawyer said flatly. You are on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You get classified briefings about al-Shabaab. The prosecution will argue you knew or should have known. And frankly, the jury will believe them. What about the DNA test? Can we challenge that? The lawyer sighed. It is from a federal laboratory. The chain of custody is documented, and the science is solid. You married your brother, Ilhan. That is a provable fact. It was just to help him get status. Lots of people do that. Lots of people don't become congresswomen and then get caught. And lots of people don't marry brothers who have terrorist connections. This isn't a typical immigration fraud case. Omar put her head in her hands. What are my options? Honestly, take a plea. The evidence is overwhelming. If you go to trial on terrorism financing charges, you could get 25 years. But if you plead guilty, show remorse, and cooperate with investigators about the al-Shabaab network, you might get 10 years. 10 years in prison? You funded terrorist attacks that killed people? Ilhan, including 2 American aid workers? If the prosecution can prove even $1 you sent was used in those attacks, you are looking at life without parole. 10 years is a gift. The next morning, the House of Representatives held an emergency session. The vote on expulsion required a two-thirds majority, 290 votes. The final tally was 376 to 54. Only 54 members, all progressive Democrats from safe seats, voted against expulsion. Every Republican voted yes. Most Democrats voted yes. Even Omar's former squad allies abstained rather than defend her. She was expelled, marking the third fastest expulsion in House history, gone after 6 years. The criminal trial began in February 2025 inches federal court in Washington, D.C. Omar pleaded not guilty to all charges. Her defense strategy was to claim she was being politically persecuted, that the evidence was manufactured, and that she was targeted for being Muslim. The prosecution presented the wire transfers, the money trail to al-Shabaab, the NSA intercepts of her phone calls with Ahmed, the DNA test proving she married her brother, her tax returns showing unreported income, and her campaign finance violations. It took the jury 3 days to deliberate. When they came back, the verdict was devastating. Guilty on 17 counts of material support for terrorism, guilty on 3 counts of immigration fraud, guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion, guilty on 4 counts of campaign finance violations. Guilty, guilty, guilty. The judge, an Obama appointee who couldn't show any bias, was harsh at sentencing. Miss Omar, you came to this country as a refugee. America gave you everything: safety, education, opportunity. You became a citizen, you were elected to Congress, and you had a platform to actually help people. And you used it to fund the very terrorists you claim to have fled from. The money you sent to Ahmed Nur Saeed was used to finance attacks that killed innocent people, including 2 American aid workers who were in Somalia trying to help refugees like you once were. Their blood is on your hands. You married your brother to commit immigration fraud, you evaded taxes, you stole campaign money, and you did all of it while lecturing Americans about their moral failings. I sentence you to 23 years in federal prison, 15 years for terrorism charges, 5 years for immigration fraud, and 3 years for tax evasion to be served consecutively. You will also pay restitution of $340,000, and I am recommending to the Department of Homeland Security that your citizenship be revoked for fraud. You obtained it illegally. You don't deserve it. Omar broke down, crying. 23 years. She would be 65 when she got out, if she got out. If her citizenship was revoked, she would be deported after serving her sentence. The denaturalization proceedings began immediately, with the DNA evidence proving she had married her brother to commit fraud and her conviction for terrorism financing. It was a formality. In June 2025, a federal judge revoked her U.S. citizenship. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar was no longer an American citizen. She was a convicted terrorist financier, serving 23 years in federal prison, facing deportation to a country that didn't want her. 6 months after her conviction, Ilhan Omar sat in her cell at FCI Coleman, a medium-security federal prison in Central Florida. Far from Minneapolis, far from her former district, far from everything. She was inmate number 6, 785-42018. That was her identity now. Not congresswoman, not activist, not refugee success story, just a number. Her first few months in prison had been brutal. Other inmates knew who she was, knew she had been a congresswoman, and knew she had been convicted of funding terrorism. Nobody likes terrorists in prison, not even the criminals. Omar had been attacked twice in the first month, both times by inmates who had lost family members in terrorist attacks. She had been moved to protective custody for her own safety. Now she spent 23 hours a day in her cell, 1 hour for exercise in a small yard, with no contact with other inmates and no visitors except her lawyer. Her family had abandoned her. Her husband divorced her while she was awaiting trial. Her children, ages 16, 14, and 10, had been taken by their father. He had changed their last names and moved to another state. They didn't visit, didn't write, and wanted nothing to do with their mother, the terrorist. Her siblings in America had issued public statements denouncing her. She betrayed our family. She betrayed America. She betrayed every refugee who came here honestly. Even the Somali American community in Minneapolis, the community that had elected her, wanted nothing to do with her. The Somali Community Center issued a statement. Ilhan Omar does not represent us. She has damaged our community's reputation, and we condemn her actions. The political fallout was immense. Her district in Minneapolis held a special election. For the first time in 60 years, a Republican won. The Republican, a Somali American woman who ran on the slogan, "Not all Somali Americans fund terrorism," won with 57%. Nationally, Democrats ran away from Somalia issues, from refugee issues, from anything associated with Omar. The Omar effect became shorthand for how one person's corruption could poison an entire movement. Muslim candidates across the country faced hostile questions. How do we know you're not like Ilhan Omar? It was unfair. It was prejudiced. But Omar had created the association. Progressive Democrats who had championed her were humiliated. AOC had to answer questions about why she had supported Omar for years, and Bernie Sanders faced criticism for endorsing her. The squad disbanded entirely. Meanwhile, Omar's appeals went nowhere. The evidence was too strong. The wire transfers were documented fact, and the DNA test was scientific proof. The convictions stood. In December 2026, her lawyer brought news she had been dreading. Omar looked up from her prison jumpsuit. What? After you serve your sentence? Or if you are released early for good behavior, you will be deported to Somalia. They have confirmed they will accept you as a citizen. But I haven't been there since I was 10 years old. I don't know anyone. I don't. You funded al-Shabaab while you were in Congress, her lawyer said bluntly. You are lucky Somalia is accepting you at all. Most countries won't take convicted terrorists. Omar sat back in her chair, the reality sinking in. Even if she survived 23 years in federal prison, even if she got out early, she would be deported to a country she didn't know, to a region controlled by the very terrorists she had funded. What will I do there? She asked quietly. That is not my problem, her lawyer said. My job was to defend you at trial. I did that. You lost because the evidence was overwhelming. What happens after you are deported is up to you. Year 1 in prison. The media still covered her. Disgraced congresswoman. Serving 23 years for terrorism, made occasional headlines when there were updates on appeals or legal proceedings. Year 2, the coverage dropped off. She was old news, replaced by other scandals and other stories. Year 3, she was forgotten. Just another federal inmate serving time. The former congresswoman who had been such a rising star was now just inmate 678542018, working in the prison laundry for 12 cents an hour. In Minneapolis, her former district had moved on. The new congresswoman, Ayaan Hirsi, no relation, was popular, effective, and everything Omar had pretended to be. When reporters occasionally asked about Omar, Hirsi's response was always the same. She betrayed our community. She betrayed refugees. She betrayed America. I don't speak about her. 5 years into her sentence, Omar got a letter from one of her children, the oldest, who was now 21. The letter was short. I changed my name. I go by Dad's last name now, not yours. I am in college, studying international relations. I want to actually help refugees, not betray them like you did. Don't write back. I don't want to hear from you. Omar read the letter 3 times, then put it away. She didn't cry. She had cried herself out in the first year. Now, there was just numbness. Year 7. A reporter from Vice wrote a long-form piece about her. Where is Ilhan Omar now? It described her prison routine, her isolation, her failed appeals, and her impending deportation. The article included an interview conducted through her lawyer. One question stood out. Do you regret what you did? Her answer, relayed through the lawyer, I regret getting caught. Not regret for funding terrorism, not regret for the people killed, not regret for betraying America, just regret for getting caught. The article went viral for a day, then was forgotten. Year 10. She came up for early release consideration. Good behavior, model prisoner, could potentially be released after 15 years instead of 23. The parole board denied her. No remorse shown, no acceptance of responsibility, continues to claim persecution rather than admitting guilt. Denied. Year 12. Another parole hearing, another denial. Still claims she was politically targeted, still won't take responsibility for funding terrorists. Denied. Year 15. She was finally granted release. After 15 years in federal prison, she had served enough time. At age 57, she walked out of FCI Coleman, a free woman, for about 6 hours. ICE agents were waiting Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Because she was no longer a U.S. citizen, she was an illegal alien, subject to deportation. They took her into custody, drove her to an ICE detention facility, and held her for 3 days while arranging the flight to Somalia. On a Tuesday morning in June 2040, Ilhan Abdullahi Omar boarded a commercial flight from Miami to Mogadishu in handcuffs, escorted by agents who would hand her over to Somali authorities. The flight took 14 hours. She sat in the back by herself, an ICE agent on either side. The other passengers knew who she was and avoided eye contact. Nobody wanted to sit near the deported terrorist. They landed in Mogadishu in the late afternoon. Hot, dusty, nothing like the city she had left as a child 33 years ago. Everything had changed, and she knew nobody. Somali authorities met her at the airport, not warmly, not welcoming the return of a native daughter, but taking custody of a problem the Americans were dumping on them. You are not welcome here, one official told her bluntly, but we have no choice but to accept you. Stay out of trouble. Don't associate with Al-Shabaab. We will be watching. They released her at a refugee processing center, gave her $50 in local currency, and told her she was on her own. Ilhan Omar, former United States Congresswoman, stood in the middle of Mogadishu with $50 and nowhere to go. No family who would speak to her. No friends, no connections. Just a middle-aged woman who had betrayed everyone who had ever believed in her. She tried to find work, but her name was known. You are the one who funded Al-Shabaab from America, people said. Employers didn't want to hire her. They couldn't risk the association. She tried to connect with the Somali diaspora, but they wanted nothing to do with her. You made all of us look like terrorists, they told her. 6 months after her deportation, she was living in a one-room apartment in a slum neighborhood, surviving on odd jobs, cleaning, cooking, whatever work she could find. 1 year after deportation, a journalist tracked her down from The Guardian, wanting to do a story on Ilhan Omar, from Congress to exile. Omar agreed to the interview, desperate for any connection to her former life, any acknowledgement that she had once mattered. The journalist asked the obvious question, do you regret it? Omar had 15 years in prison to think about her answer, to develop some insight, to show growth. Her answer? I regret trusting the wrong people. I regret not being more careful. I regret letting my family down. Still no real accountability. Still no acknowledgement that she had funded terrorism, that people had died because of money she sent, or that she had betrayed America. The article ran with the headline, Ilhan Omar. Still no remorse. And that was the last major coverage she received. After that, nothing. Complete obscurity. In Washington, her name became a punchline, a cautionary tale. When politicians were accused of corruption, opponents would say, "Don't pull an Ilhan Omar." When refugees were discussed, someone would always bring up Omar as an example of why we needed better vetting. It was unfair to other refugees, but Omar had created that association. In Minneapolis, the Somali American community erected a memorial to the 2 American aid workers killed in the 2022 Mogadishu bombing. The bombing funded by money Ilhan Omar had sent to her brother-in-law. The memorial had 2 plaques, one honoring the aid workers, one acknowledging that members of the Somali American community condemned terrorism in all forms. Nobody mentioned Omar by name, but everyone knew. VP JD Vance, who had exposed her at that committee hearing 5 years ago, was asked about her in an interview. Ilhan Omar's story should have been inspiring, he said. Refugee escapes violence, comes to America, becomes Congresswoman, the American dream. But she betrayed that dream. She used her position to fund the very terrorists she claimed to have fled from. Now she is deported, living in poverty in Somalia, and nobody cares. That is not political persecution. That is justice. In Mogadishu, Ilhan Omar turned 60, living in that one-room apartment. No family, no friends, no purpose, just existing. Sometimes she thought about what could have been. If she had actually been the congresswoman she had pretended to be, if she had actually fought for refugees instead of enriching herself and her family, if she had been honest, but mostly she didn't think about it, because thinking about what she had lost was too painful. She was 62 when she died, suffering a heart attack in her apartment. Nobody found her for 3 days, until the neighbors complained about the smell. There was no funeral, no memorial service, and no obituary in American papers. The Guardian ran 3 paragraphs. Ilhan Abdullahi Omar, former U.S. Congresswoman who was convicted of terrorism, financing, and deported, died in Mogadishu at age 62. Omar served in Congress from 2019 to 2025 before being expelled and convicted of sending $340,000 to al-Shabaab operatives. She served 15 years in federal prison before deportation. She is survived by 3 children who declined to comment. That was it. That was the legacy. From refugee to congresswoman to convicted terrorist to deported exile dying alone in poverty. She had had every advantage, every opportunity, and she had betrayed it all, not because of Islamophobia, not because of racism, not because of political persecution, but because she had made a choice to fund terrorists, to lie about her marriage, to evade taxes, to steal campaign money, and to betray America. And in the end, she paid for those choices. Not with a few years of bad press, not with losing an election, but with 15 years in prison, deportation, and dying alone in the country she had betrayed America to help. That wasn't persecution. That was consequence, and it was exactly what she deserved.